Marketing wrote that. A lot cooler than I am. I'm really excited to be here. So who here does transactional work? Anyone? Okay. Let me see my civil litigation peeps. All right. Someone here does criminal. That. All right. Very good. And then where are the hardworking family law paralegals? Yeah, right here. Right. Okay. Get them an extra glass of wine or something. They truly do have the hardest job. So I was really excited to get invited to come and visit with you. Everyone seems to have some level of interest in marijuana and marijuana law. It is possible that some people in this room have smoked marijuana. Or you may know someone that has smoked marijuana. I don't know. Maybe Amber, we don't know. So I guess to go back, so for time immemorial, kind of going back 90 years, possession of marijuana was illegal in the United States, illegal in the state of Texas, punishable under the Health and Safety Code. The law changed a lot recently, and Texas is somewhere between 10 to 20 years behind the coastal states on regulating marijuana, but it's catching up. So in 2018, the federal farm bill passes, and the federal farm bill redefined what marijuana means, what cannabis sativa means, and what hemp means. The next year, the Texas hemp bill passes. That further changed the legal definition, and we'll get in the weeds on what that means here in a second.
That's cute.
But the short version is this. Whatever people call hemp or marijuana or cannabis, it's all the same plant. It's all a plant called cannabis sativa. Prior to the 2018 hemp bill, the portion of the cannabis sativa plant that had flowers or that had buds, that was called marijuana. And then the remainder, that was simply called hemp, right? That changed. And the federal farm bill said, states, you define out what is illegal marijuana versus what is legal cannabis. And so the state of Texas in 2019 came up with a new definition. Instead of separating marijuana from hemp based on the portion of the cannabis sativa plant, it's now defined based on the THC content, right? So whether it's the stalk, the flower, the bud, whatever, perfectly legal hemp in the state of Texas is cannabis sativa that contains no more than 0.3% THC. Illegal marijuana is cannabis sativa that has more than 0.3% THC. Well, that's a big problem in criminal law, because whether cannabis sativa has more or less than 0.3% THC, you can't tell with the naked eye. It looks the same, it smells the same. If you smoke it, the smoke looks the same and smells the same. And so how can law enforcement go around stopping people, searching people, arresting people based on the odor of illegal marijuana when that smells the same as legal hemp? Then the state of Texas, it's perfectly legal to produce, to cultivate, to transport, distribute, and sell. Now, Austin was a little hip to this early on. And relatively early on in the process, Austin City Council passed a resolution directing the Austin Police Department make marijuana enforcement your absolute lowest priority. And so for a period of time, we kind of went through a transition. When I started practicing criminal law 15 years ago, it was really routine to see marijuana cases prosecuted. It was really routine. Even the Austin Police Department would arrest people for possessing low-level quantities of marijuana, a couple of joints. They'd be put into jail. Some people might sit in jail for quite a while, and then those cases would resolve out. About 5 years ago, that shifted more toward a model of cite and release. So there are a couple of different criminal offenses where instead of an officer arresting you, they can just give you a citation, just like a speeding ticket, and then say, hey, you need to show up and deal with it. So we shifted from the vast majority of our marijuana cases being from an arrest to the vast majority being these cite and release. It's a citation that you're issued, you're told you have to show up at the Justice of the Peace Court, you get magistrated, then processed. Well, that really fundamentally changed come 2020, where the truth of the matter was, no one really cared about these marijuana cases, right? Our juries didn't, the prosecutors didn't, the community didn't. It was a distraction and a misallocation of resources away from criminal enforcement activities that really matter. I got hired on a marijuana cite and release case earlier this year. It was in Travis County, in Austin. And it was like finding a living fossil. It was a Department of Public Safety trooper that was patrolling in the capital area, because APD doesn't write these things anymore. Travis County Sheriff's Office doesn't do it anymore. Manor PD really doesn't. Some of the kind of jankier law enforcement agencies in the western part of the county, every now and then you'll see it. But those DPS troopers, they kind of do what they want. And so we had this sweet, really nice young student from UT who pulled the wrong way on a one-way somewhere around the Capitol complex. Gets pulled over and was issued a citation for marijuana. I'm like talking with her and like, she's really nice. I'm trying to piece it together. And so I, hire her. I said, well, look, if you don't hire me, if you do nothing, this will be dismissed. You don't need to do anything. But she'd had an open container or something. Need legal work on something else. So I call up the Justice of the Peace. Has anyone here ever dealt with Judge Nicholas Chu? Yeah. Everybody loved Nick. So Nick's my best friend. We used to live together. His daughter's my goddaughter. So I called Judge Chu. I'm like, Nick, I thought we didn't do these anymore. Like, what is this? And he's like, wow, you got one? We get about, because we get about 20 of those a year now. 20 a year. So is it a crime to possess marijuana in Travis County in the city of Austin? Yes, it is a crime. Will you be arrested for it? No. Will you be issued a citation for it? Almost certainly not. Will the cops take your weed? If you're just driving and you get pulled over and there's a bunch of marijuana in a baggie and they're like, is that marijuana? And you're like, yeah, it's my marijuana.
Depends on what kind it is.
Kind of, yeah. Sometimes they won't even take your marijuana. That's in Austin, Travis County. Okay, every jurisdiction is different. Let's see.
What kind do they take?
The good kind. So we are surrounded by counties, and y'all know from your civil practice or other areas of practice, every court's a little bit different. Every county clerk or district clerk, filings get rejected for some weird reason. Same thing with prosecutors, same thing with law enforcement. Every jurisdiction's a little bit different. Hays County. Hays County is at this point probably the most kind of conservative of the larger counties around us when it comes to marijuana. There has been a decline in just straight marijuana arrests in Hays County, but they still prosecute it. And in fact, I was in Hays County this morning in county court representing a really sweet, nice young kid who'd been pulled over for speeding or something silly. And he had just like a little, I was looking for something to demonstrate with, like a little container, like this size of, they alleged his urine. And they alleged that was a drug test falsification device. We've been messing with this case for like 3 years. This guy has no prior criminal history. His family cares. He didn't even have a job. He was on probation. Weird to drive around with a small container of pee, but not a crime, right? So that's a great question. No, they never tested the substance to determine if it was or was not what was alleged. And so we were set for trial. We were going to go to trial on this dumb case on Monday. I had a whole theory because I'm pretty sure that liquid would have evaporated over 3 years. Anyway, we got dismissed this morning. But they're a little bit more hardcore in those different jurisdictions. Williamson, they're pretty cool. I mean, at this point for on misdemeanor marijuana stuff, yeah, they changed. Williamson County is not Williamson County of John Bradley and Ken Anderson from 20 years ago. Yeah. Still not the easiest jurisdiction in the world, but the county attorney's office, the elected county attorney is a gentleman named D. Hobbs, super nice. He actually brought in a lot of prosecutors from Travis County. The culture has changed dramatically up there. On marijuana cases, they're not going to care. They care about DWI stuff. And you can just see in the raw numbers. After the hemp bill, that's would that be a 60%, 70-odd% decline in marijuana cases prosecuted in the state of Texas. Actual misdemeanor marijuana cases prosecuted in Travis County, like to a sentence, to a conviction, nothing. It had been the world where they would make you take a class, a drug education class, which as I got toward the end of my prosecution career, I just thought was sort of stupid.
Well, they need more dealers there, right?
No.
They find more new drug buddies.
Yeah, if you don't know where to buy marijuana in Austin, just turn to your neighbor, ask, and it ain't hard. And you can see Williamson County, same thing, Off Cliff, Hayes has moved quite a bit. Can we make this play?
Great play.
Okay, I forgot about this. Does anyone here know Mindy Montfort? Any Mindy Montfort love? Okay, so her son, Ford McCracken, is like a real tech whiz, and he made this PowerPoint. And I forgot we found this. So this is a DPS trooper, not the DPS trooper who arrested my sweet angel around the Capitol area, but
Oh my God. Okay.
yeah. So he had stopped someone and pulled them over and observed what he thought was the odor of marijuana, and then seized a THC vape pen. So the new frontier is not flower marijuana. Flower marijuana at this point is just very rarely prosecuted, very rarely results in an arrest. In fact, so much so, I was hired, it was either last year or this year, I can't recall. But he was a nice guy. He's a small businessman operating in a difficult regulatory environment. That means he's a drug dealer. And he had all the normal drug dealer accoutrement. He had like 4.5 ounces, 5.5 ounces of marijuana, a little bit of cocaine, a little bit of methamphetamine, 9mm, bunch of small plastic baggies, scale, little ledger book. Kind of the tools of the trade. And he had, in our life, it is always better, I think, to be lucky and good. And so this guy's up in Cedar Park. And there's a small portion of the city of Cedar Park that's in Travis County. So Cedar Park PD goes and they're executing a search warrant for something or other, and they find all this stuff and they arrest him. And so he gets like a 3rd-degree marijuana charge, a 2nd-degree cocaine charge and gun charge, whatever. And so he hires me. He's a really, really, really nice guy. He went to Anderson. Any of you guys need a good drug dealer. And I'm like, kind of hot, excited. I haven't had a good marijuana case in a while, certainly not Travis County, where things have changed a lot when the new administration came in. And we get like a week into this case, and I got a letter from the district attorney that they're just declining it. Just like straight, like period, full stop, declining the case because it's just drugs. That's the new world. Don't go into the drug dealing business, but drugs, unless you are dealing in substantial amounts of very unpopular drugs, basically things are fine here in Travis County. Now, what's funny is Cedar Park PD hated this. They really didn't like the district attorney chose to decline prosecution. And so they had seized his watch, and I think he had some Air Jordans, maybe the car, whatever cash he had. And so they then sent that to the U.S. attorney to try to seize all those assets. So even though we got all the criminal stuff dismissed, we're still having to mess with, again, this kid is shoes back. That's how it is. So the law is emerging in the state of Texas, and where it really becomes important in my practice is so many searches of vehicles and searches of people are based on what an officer believes to be the odor of freshly burnt marijuana. And that is just a common, you see that in offense reports all the time. And what that odor does in the past is, okay, it's illegal to possess marijuana. If I'm the cop and I smell marijuana, that must mean I have reasonable suspicion that you have been involved in some criminal activity and probable cause to believe that there may be evidence of that, right? Because, you know, United States of America, you are free in your person. You're free of unwarranted searches. Cops have to go and get a search warrant to go look in your car or go get in your house. But if they smell marijuana in the past, that was fine. There's not really case law in Texas yet directly addressed. There's been this McAfee case where the court at least acknowledged that there's an issue, but then said, hey, you know, we're not going to figure that out this time. Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, a couple of other states, we have gotten good law on it. But that is a huge change if the odor of marijuana alone is insufficient probable cause to search a vehicle without a warrant. And where the rubber really hits the road on that is actually more on certain types of violent crime. This is just one man's theory. Be very wrong on this. Let me preface this. And my girlfriend's a federal public defender. We argue about this all the time. I think a lot of what you see in the crime statistics here in Austin and other places where there is more violent crime now is in some ways attributable to these changes. It is much harder to stop a vehicle and conduct a warrantless search now than it was 2 or 3 years ago. And the result of that is that you have more people that are kind of driving around that may have been engaged in criminal activity, that may be on parole or probation, that have a gun, or that have drugs, but they're not getting searched. Okay, so there's sort of, yes, ma'am.
Question. So I was at Flip Fest over the weekend, and we all got searched on the way on our vehicles. All of us had to consent to search our vehicle, whether or not you had anything. They had drug dogs out. They had metal detectors and everything, but they didn't even say why they were searching it. They just searched all of our vehicles. Was
this going in or leaving?
It was going in, and it was in Gonzales, Texas, and everybody had to get out of the vehicle, and they had to search all. They searched all the vehicles.
So
but there were still lots of drugs. They somehow managed to get all the drugs.
Were you just going to the concert or were you camping?
I was just going to the concert, and so yeah, and they were like, they didn't even ask for tickets, they didn't ask about camping, and
if it was private,
get out of the vehicle, we have to search the vehicle.
If it was private property,
yeah,
then they could say, oh, these are our rules for entrance. Yeah. But also, in my experience, you said Seguin.
It was Gonzales.
Oh, Gonzales. Yeah, the United States Constitution doesn't apply as much there. They're a lot less worried about that stuff. So, my general advice is be polite, be cooperative, decline search of the vehicle, speak softly because the microphone has trouble picking up soft voices. But if it's an illegal search, it's an illegal search, whether you hoot and holler at the time or not, right? And where people usually end up getting arrested is they fail the attitude test. Law enforcement police have tremendous discretion. Tremendous discretion.
I think it was the constable that was.
Yeah, and so you're dealing with.
Sorry.
Anyone here married to a constable? There's a reason y'all hire the private processor. All right, so where are we? Oh, canines. That's another good one with marijuana law. And the same problem. So canines are drug dogs. Cops love their drug dogs. They always have cool names, Rambo or Duke or Major or something like that. And they train with them. And they're like, they get really into it. The dogs were all trained on the old marijuana. Okay, so the dogs are trained to alert at the odor of marijuana. Well, if it's legal now to possess cannabis sativa, but the dog alerts at the odor of cannabis sativa, how can the alert from the dog be justification for a warrantless search. It doesn't make sense, right? So, okay, two stories on that. One, this is actually a case that my girlfriend prosecuted. It's a good little federal drug case, gun case. Law enforcement had basically been stalking this guy. They knew they wanted him. They pull him over for kind of a BS reason, and they get the dog out. And it took maybe 5 or 10 minutes to get the dog to the scene. And the guy's in like a Corolla, and then like one car over, there's a Camry. And so they let the dog out, and the dog starts going around the Camry, and then the dog jumps into the back seat of the Camry. The dog was supposed to be searching the Corolla, and then the dog pops up, and this is all in the body cam. It's great. And the dog has a piece of pizza in its mouth. And the cop turns over and goes, Banjo, pizza was always hard for you.
No.
The dogs are very human in that behavior. And so years ago, this was like a decade ago, so you know David Gonzalez, Sumter Gonzalez, great lawyer, really good guy. I was the prosecutor, he was the defense attorney, and he was representing basically a drug mule who transported like 5 kilograms of cocaine. That's too much. You're not allowed to do that. And they run the dog. And I'd never seen this. I now do this in my private practice. David subpoenaed the training records on the dog, right? Because the dogs have to go through training. And lo and behold, this dog had failed cocaine like 3 times. And on the 4th try, the dog finally passed cocaine. And David's whole theory was, this dog didn't know what he was doing. Because frequently when they say, oh, the dog alerted, the alert can be, oh, well, the dog sat down. The dog didn't sit down. The dog wagged its tail. It didn't wag its tail. Its ears perked up. Its ears didn't perk up. And it's like, well, the dog's just being a dog. So I was raising a puppy at that point. That dog's now 10 years old. And I was struggling. As anyone who's ever done potty training and with puppy knows. And so for this hearing, David had brought in some like big dude dog trainer. He'd been in the Navy. He trained military dogs, and he's very impressive. This is what I do for a living. So we're at a break, and I say, oh, Mr. So-and-so, I'm really struggling. The dog's name is Ladybird. Really struggling getting Ladybird not to pee in this one area. And he goes, well, I'll tell you, with positive reinforcement, there's nothing that you can't do 3 or 4 months. But with a choke chain, you can do it in a week.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how they train those dogs, and so you get a sense of the reliability of it. So here in Austin, Travis County, they don't use dog alerts as the sole reason for search anymore. Dogs, they can't tell the difference between hemp and marijuana. But then on that basis, then how can you trust any of their alerts? And so that's an area that we litigate all around the state. What we found is generally when we raise these issues, the cases end up getting dismissed. And so we've tried it at the trial court level a couple of times. We haven't successfully had anything go up on appeal because for the most part, prosecutors would rather dump the case than have to expend the resources. And so that's why there's not law. It's kind of the Wild West on that. I get asked about medical marijuana a lot. Texas has something called the Compassionate Use Program. It's a pretty watered down version of a medical marijuana program. When the program initiated in 2019, it covered a very narrow range of diagnoses. And it only allowed for products, prescribed medication that had up to 0.5%, it was 0.25% THC, which in the world of THC is like nothing. That would be like your great grandma's marijuana. Something like it's not contemporary marijuana. 2021, the legislature starts moving forward with expanding it a bit. And so what's interesting is a bill comes out of the Texas House and goes over to the Senate. And the true expansion, it's not epilepsy, seizure, MS, ALS. It's PTSD, right? PTSD is a really common mental health diagnosis. And when that bill came over from the House to the Senate, it applied to veterans with PTSD, which makes a lot of sense because people that serve abroad and serve in the military frequently end up with trauma that can result in a PTSD diagnosis. Well, the Senate looked at that and said, well, wait a second. If medical marijuana is effective at treating PTSD in veterans, why wouldn't it be effective in treating PTSD in people that didn't serve, right? And so that got expanded. So the kind of the camel's nose in the tent of true marijuana legalization in Texas is probably the PTSD component. The legislature then also doubled the amount of permissible THC to 1%, which is also like, wait, yes, ma'am.
When my mom was on hospice from terminal brain cancer, and let's see, June 2021, I got her it through the compassionate use act, but I feel like there was only like 2 places I could get it, and it was a tincture, and it was.
That's right. Yeah, it is. It is. I'm
And it was
sorry.
100.
Yeah.
For like this much. Is that, did I just not find the right?
No, you did it right. It's a weak watered down program. I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
My father passed of ALS. My sister happens to have MS. My sister lives in the state of Washington, and she has like the good marijuana that's prescribed up there. And she's like 100 pounds. She looks just like me, but super thin. And then she started using that product, and appetite was all much better. So it's coming. But this then adds another layer, because there's a whole lot of case law out of Pennsylvania and out of Maryland where, well, if it's legal to possess THC products with a prescription, how can a search be based on that possession, right? Because the cop doesn't know at the time, at the moment, whether or not you have the legal right to possess it medically. Okay? And so that'll change over time. I had some better stuff. So all of this is evolving, and I've seen it in real time. I do a lot of work in the Hill Country, in Burnett, Lampasas, Llano, Gillespie, jurisdictions out there. I live in Blanco, Texas, and our DA, the DA that covers Blanco, Llano, Burnett, and San Saba, is a gentleman named Sonny McAfee. He's a great district attorney. He is very conservative in his approach, not like a Republican Democrat thing, but as a prosecutor, but he's really good at his job. He's really smart, and he's pretty hard on drugs. And in those Western counties, just to the west of Travis, there's a lot of methamphetamine. And methamphetamine is kind of the main focus of drug prosecution out there. But I generally get hired kind of by, I don't want to say young, dumb kids, but kids who go out and do silly things. And frequently it's these vape pens. Have any of y'all seen these CBD or THC vape pens? Most gas, not in Austin, Texas, but most gas stations outside of Austin, if you walk in there, you'll see a display that has the CBD, or increasingly you'll see Delta 8 or Delta 9 and the less than 0.3% THC. If you want a wild weekend, pick one of those up. They're just drugs. Okay, I mean they are as potent as. No, they're as potent as anything that you would get at a dispensary in Las Vegas or in Denver, and it's perfectly legal. Perfectly legal to bring it into the state. Perfectly legal to sell it. And so I was in Llano not too long ago and arguing over some dumb vape pen case. I think the vape pen cases are really stupid. And I walked into the courthouse, and I was just walking in. There's a head shop, a place that sells kind of drug accoutrement on the courthouse square. There's a really cute courthouse. There's Cooper's Barbecue. There's really good. There's a really good ice cream place. There's a good. If you go to the Hill Country, I can give you food recommendations in all the courthouses. And so I go over there, and I'm like, hey, let me have the whatever edible CBD THC stuff. And I bought some of the flour, and I bought a pen, and then there was like a soda pop. You can get the CBD THC soda pop. And so I bring it with me into the courthouse, in the courtroom, and I give it to Sonny. And I'm like, this is what I bought right now, like 10 minutes ago, right there. This is the legal stuff. And the legal stuff is more powerful and more intense than the illegal stuff that you're prosecuting. So what do we do? Right?
How do they check? How do you test vape pen?
That's a great question. They hate it. So because it's just some liquid, right? They have to ship it off to the Department of Public Safety to do a laboratory analysis and then have the results come back. It's a huge waste of time.
Is it DPS or DSHS?
No, it's Department of Public Safety. It's their lab. Anyone like to go to Fredericksburg? Right? Enchanted Rock? Anyone go to Enchanted Rock? Okay, so here are 2 free pro tips. Do not bring drugs to Enchanted Rock. They run like a happy hunting grounds there. They have a program, a lot of enforcement. I get hired all the time by people. For some reason, people love to take magic mushrooms to Enchanted Rock. It's like a spiritual place. But the way you have to get in, you have to go past this like little entry booth thing. You get stopped up in line and they have these, they're like Texas Parks and Wildlife cops who will kind of walk through, and shockingly, they all smell marijuana all the time. They don't actually find marijuana, but they will frequently find mushrooms. So do not bring mushrooms to Enchanted Rock. That's pro tip number 1. I mean, really, I get so many of those, it's shocking. And then 2, they are not cool about drugs in Gillespie County. It is a very conservative jurisdiction. District Attorney's husband was ex-DEA. It's probably the most conservative place I go to in terms of drugs. You want to take some marijuana or THC or a little bit of cocaine to Lampasas? We can fix that. That's not a problem. Burn it, heavier lift, we can get there. Gillespie, that takes a lot of work. So yeah, we'll go into questions. We'll just go there. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I have a question. And our youngest daughter lives in Colorado. We fall there. What my concern is on some of this stuff is making something legal without some kind of parameter or gauge around what encourages you to drive. We have that with alcohol. So why do we not have that with marijuana? And I'm surprised it's kind of like they put the cart before the horse here.
Yeah, I think that's right. So Colorado does have a per se standard. So in this normal DWI law, you are intoxicated if the government can prove beyond reasonable doubt you have a blood alcohol content of 0.08 or higher. So that's just a per se standard. Or if you have lost the normal use of your mental or physical faculties due to the introduction of alcohol, or drug, medication, or some combination. Colorado has a per se standard. I don't recall off the top of my head, it's something like, I think it's 0.5 nanograms per liter of. The challenge, as I understand it, I'm by no means an expert in this area. So you have the active compound of the THC and then the metabolite. And so when you do a blood test, you can see kind of if there was a peak, right? Like at the moment that blood was drawn, you can see the active component of the substance, but then you're also going to get a level of use. And it's hard to tease out, well, someone that hasn't smoked marijuana for 36 hours can have a very high level of metabolite, right? Because they smoke marijuana all the time, but they haven't recently. I think a per se standard is coming, just like in Colorado, but then you come down to that second prong, which is loss of the normal use of your mental or physical faculties. You're absolutely right, and it is a problem in Colorado. And you can see in their numbers, yeah, alcohol-related offenses are down, but collisions and other activity related to marijuana possession and use is up. So yeah, it's a good point. Yeah,
Actually, I had a very similar kind of thought about this because I actually saw somebody the other day. I was crossing the street downtown, and the passenger in a car at the stoplight was like had like a pipe in their hand, and they were putting their lighter, and it took me aback because it's like, wait, you're not allowed to do that. But then I was like, but well, are they? And so yeah, that was kind of the similar thing of like, how I can see where for an enforcement official that like their training for the last many years is going to kick in and have them immediately go on edge about it.
right.
And so then that kind of like that moment of coming back, but like if somebody's like literally sparking up in the car. I mean,
Yeah, it's a time, place, and manner issue, and very genuinely, what I worry about I've spent a lot of time in Portland over the last few years, a couple of cases, and time in San Francisco. There is a real danger in, I don't want to say decriminalization, but in acceptance of a certain level of drug use in public. Okay. And you can see that in those downtowns. And that's not a direction that Austin should go or wants to go, right? We've kind of already seen that a couple of years ago or 18 months ago with the changes in the camping ordinance that allowed for public camping for a period of time in Austin. That, whether you were for that or against it, or it was good or it was bad, it was problematic, right? And how it was dealt with. And I think what you've hit on is really central, which is what are these consequences and how do we get in front of them? I don't know. Yes, ma'am.
So what is your projection for the 88th legislature in January?
That's a great question. I thought for my purposes, the most important bill that had come, or that died last session in 2021, the House passed and the Senate passed a bill that would change criminal penalties for possession of a controlled substance less than 1 gram THC. So for the most part, when we get hired on these vape pen cases, a lot of them are like it's in school or it's usually something kind of stupid. They have one vape pen and they have one little cartridge. Cartridge almost always has less than 1 gram. Well, right now that's punished as a felony, anywhere from a minimum of 6 months to a maximum of 2 years in the state jail. State jail just means kind of crappier prison, basically. That's really harsh, right? Much harsher than it needs to be. And so the House, by about a 2-to-1 margin, and the Senate by about a 2-to-1 margin, passed a bill that would have lowered that penalty from a felony to a Class A misdemeanor. Well, that's a really big deal because all throughout this state, you have people that will get arrested for possessing this very low-level THC product. We're talking edibles, right? If you have a couple of gummies or whatever, as long as it's under an ounce, and they're prosecuted as felonies. And many of these people are convicted, right? And that felony conviction then lasts with them throughout life. My hope is, if nothing else happens, lower the penalties for low-level THC possession. Those things don't need to be felonies. It's not a use of time. I don't think there's going to be a substantive change on actual possession, right? Maybe make it a Class C offense, but you have a lot of different viewpoints. I mean, even among prosecutors. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I did go to a dispensary a few days ago in Massachusetts.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And,
Bring back.
We're flying on an airplane, yeah. No, my father-in-law actually does have medical marijuana use. And so on one side, it was, the medical people, and then the other side was just for and it was fascinating that the clinic, you can order it online. You can go online, place your order, and then go and pick it out. And they checked your ID like twice. They had security outside. It was like going into a doctor's office.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, has there been any repercussion on the civil side? For example, if your neighbor smells marijuana all the time and that odor is inside your house or your condo or something like that, has there been any discussion about how to handle that?
I haven't seen cases like that, but you have the right to the quiet peace and enjoyment of your private property, and if there's a noxious odor, that could give you a claim.
Could they say, well, but it's legal, so it's not an illegal odor?
There are lots of odors that are legal that still smell bad.
Yeah.
It's not illegal to butcher hogs, but I don't want my neighbor doing it.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
I recently moved and I was outside, letting my dog out to do his business when I smelled the smell.
Oh, yeah.
And I went in and I texted a friend of mine and I'm like, there's either a really bad skunk in my neighborhood or someone in my neighborhood smoking weed. And she texted me back and she said, in my experience, neighbors that smoke weed don't argue in their yard, so that's probably.
It's interesting where things are going, right? The upshot, and I think the best thing that comes out of this is is hopefully there should be a redirection of law enforcement prosecutors to putting their resources into violent crime, sexual assault, domestic violence, homicide, the types of things that really make our community unsafe. The challenge with kind of antisocial behavior, right, and I would put public drug use in that category, is how to manage it, right? And what I've found through my practice, and marijuana is kind of different, you know, generally speaking, people are not physiologically addicted to THC. Certainly some people do become dependent, right, and potentially even chemically dependent, but it is a different type of addiction, or materially different than methamphetamine or heroin or cocaine, right? And so if we're going to have a legal structure that says the use of marijuana and marijuana products is to a certain extent legal, just like the use of alcohol, then you have to have a legal regime to control that, just like we have laws against driving while intoxicated, principally about alcohol, just like you have laws against public intoxication. But that will evolve over time. The reality, though, is that it will be messy. And I think we're already starting to see that in Austin.
So I got this presentation, TBLS approved for family law, civil, PI. So I just want to touch on it. Do you think with the laws changing, we don't do that much family law, but we did for a friend.
Oh, yeah.
And the mother of the child was just trying to make a huge deal about him being a pot smoker and his girlfriend being a pot smoker. And it was Judge Sines, and he asked the girlfriend, "Do you have a license?" She said, "Yeah," and then he just talked about it again. And like everybody just threw their hands up. And so I don't know what those evil defense, personal injury paralegals, I don't know what their experience is. But do you get charged? Like, is that something that they're gonna like when there's a personal injury lawsuit, they're harassing the poor plaintiff about marijuana? Is that gonna change? Is that gonna
No.
So I think I'll be right there. So on family law, and I can, my law partner, Jeffrey Conley, does family law practice. I can speak to it just a little bit. Certainly in Travis County, I do not see our judges, our civil district judges remotely caring about marijuana use. Other stuff, yes. With young adults, if you're under 18, really males under 25, women under like 20, they just should not be using marijuana. Like it is very problematic. I do a lot of mental health work. I work for Judge Herman as one of the judges that does the commitment hearings. Early drug use absolutely contributed to an initial episode of psychosis, schizophrenia, accelerated, really problematic and heartbreaking mental health disorders. We really want to see kids, even like college kids really should be. But in a family law setting, I mean, I don't see, do our judges care about weed? I mean, I've seen a lot of our judges smoke weed. I don't think. Now, as the personal injury side, I mean, do you guys, subpoena the driver's blood and go send it for testing?
In Travis County, it doesn't really hold any weight anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't subpoena anybody's blood, but.
And there's like liability, there's.
Sure. I mean, if it's like a big issue, I'm dealing with a death case where that's a big part of it, but Travis County, generally speaking, if there's a marijuana issue.
This is when you do your victim blaming?
Yeah.
Sure.
And then, yes, ma'am.
So in family law, where we primarily use this is it's exclusively usually in custody cases. So we'll do a motion for drug testing with the order accompanying it, and we've expanded since the laws and the acts have changed. We expanded from just like possession or like small use to testing for delta 8, THC, ETG, alcohol testing. We do it. We do a 13 panel hair test, which takes half of your head off, half of your hair off. But we can do it as egregious as we need to, but we also do it in extreme circumstances where we know that there's drug use around children. So like, or we'll do injunction where you're enjoined from using it while you're in possession of the children or within 24 to 48 hours of possession of the children. Because the fact that the standard is that if you're using it around the children, it says it's okay. to use it with, to have the children see you using it. So it's a little bit different.
Yeah, well, and in general, intoxicated people generally aren't appropriately protective parents. So I definitely see on the family law side. There are a lot of clients I have who are in a divorce or in a SAPSR, and they may have a DWI or some other offense. And for my purposes in criminal law, you know, it's a machine. That criminal courthouse, I mean, it's. Judge, do y'all remember Judge John Dietz?
Yes.
Yeah. So Dietz was a funny guy. He's like, look, it's a slaughterhouse. You put down the cow, bring in the next one, put that one down. That's what Dietz. But you know, like it moves quickly. There are a lot of cases, and you know, I've had clients who had terrible records of alcohol abuse, and periods of inpatient treatment and multiple arrests, and you know, really terrible things. And they're, you know, ordered to get alcohol monitoring, and then, you know, they just stop doing it. It takes the DA like 9 months to figure it out, and then the DA is like, well, wait a second, we should get him back on the monitor. Okay, that's criminal world. Over here in SAPSR divorce world, my clients that are on the portable alcohol monitor, Jeffrey's clients, and if they miss a blow, we're getting a phone call from the other spouses or the other parent's lawyer like in 10 minutes. And they're like, there's no way Logan will see his children this weekend. And we're fine. Blah, blah, blah. I think it's a matter of kind of how engaged each party is. But you're absolutely right. And I've seen success in the family law side where I haven't in the criminal side of actually getting people to change their behavior. You know, the reality is someone that drinks too much or may have an alcohol addiction or a drug addiction, getting them to internally motivate to change can be really difficult, which is basically what the criminal system does. Whereas over in family law world, it's like, you want to see your kid or not? Like this is how your life will be if you want to be in your child's life.
Sometimes we have to do a little bit more custom provisions where it's like, if you don't like pass the drug test, then you forfeit your possession. If you don't complete the alcohol classes, you forfeit your possession. So it depends. Like, you can, like I said, you can be more egregious than not. We've done multiple step possession, phase possession. It just depends on how much the client really wants the injunction.
That's right. So I represent, you know, my practice is a lot of homicide, sexual assault, fentanyl distribution, you know, high-level drug dealers, human trafficking. I would much rather sit at a table with those clients than like your routine family law client. I'm serious. I think you have the hardest job. I see what our family law paralegals do, and not to knock anybody else, but like exceptional patience. I mean, they're wonderful, wonderful people, but man, can they get upset about stuff.
Yeah. I freelance for five family law attorneys, and they have 31 papers.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting
They're
it.
all so nice. And so I think
The lawyers are great. It's the clients.
I mean, it's not all crazy. Like,
No.
I want to say that I've worked for crazy family law, and I've now worked, like, I don't take clients who have crazy. So I'm like, hey, you're crazy with you.
Yeah, but someone has to represent
But
them.
yeah, I mean, it doesn't say that there's not ever
Yeah.
cases, but for the most part, it's very satisfying.
No, it is. It's very important work. Well, I've loved this. Thank you guys so much for having me. I'll leave some cards up at the front, and if you want to holler, you know, shoot me an email if you have any follow-up questions. But really, it was a joy.
Thank you. Hopefully, we don't need to have your cards for personal reasons.
Life is messy.
Right, did you have a charity choice? Do we want to make a small donation?
Well, if so, you're supporting volunteer legal services this year. That I love volunteer legal services. There you go. Okay, so I'm gonna leave cards at the front. I'm gonna.
Yes. And I boxed
appreciate
you up some salmon if you'd like to take it with you. It's in that tray. Don't worry about it.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye, folks.
Take care. Have a good day.
All right, so just a few announcements and then we will do the door prizes that you are all sticking around for. So I just want to announce our upcoming event, Meet the Board and